I think we're ready to start the webinar. We have a good attendance so far, and it's climbing, but we can start the session. We have around 70 attendees right now, and it's climbing by the minute. So thank you everyone for coming to the session, for attending the session, and a special thank you for all the three experts that are going to be speaking. We are at a special webinar, special session for Peer Review Week 23, and we're going to be discussing the future of peer review in research publishing, navigating possibilities and challenges over the next 5 to 10 years. This webinar is co-presented by Inago as well as Charlesworth Author Services. And again, a warm welcome to all the attendees. Before we begin with the webinar, I'd like to take a few minutes to take you through what Inago is and what Charlesworth Author Services is. So Inago, that is founded in 2005, is the world's leading author services provider that has worked with the researcher, academic, and publisher communities in more than 125 countries so far. Working with more than 2,000 subject matter, language, and publication experts in your discipline, and also with a 24-hour support system, we strive to provide the best and the most customizable services for you so that you can focus on your research and leave the rest to us. Inago also hosts Inago Academy. We are experts in scholarly communication with a passion to help researchers and achieve publication success. Inago Academy is the knowledge arm of Inago that focuses on providing knowledge resources on research writing, publishing in journals, and promotion of published work. So far, we have around 5,000 in-depth knowledge resources and articles that are free and open for everyone to read and select. We're also available in English, Japanese, Simplified Chinese, Korean, and Spanish languages. We have conducted more than 600 live and on-demand workshops and webinars for more than 85,000 researchers so far to help them understand concepts of research writing and publishing. Next, Charlesworth Author Services is a company that recently joined us. Charlesworth Author Services supports authors from submission to publication and beyond, and they are the British specialists in academic editing since 1928. With a market-leading team of specialist editors based predominantly in the UK and US, all of whom have PhDs or equivalent in your discipline, we offer native English-level editing proven to improve your chances of publication success. Recommended by leading international journals, used by authors from more than 1,500 universities, and proud partners of global STM publishers, including AIP, Frontiers, RSC, and Royal Society, to name a few. And with that, we come to the esteemed panel. Let me quickly introduce you. First, we have with us Kim Eggleton, Head of Peer Review and Research Integrity at IOP Publishing. Welcome, Kim, and thank you for agreeing to come on the session. A proud member of the publishing industry for nearly 20 years, Kim has worked in editorial roles across social sciences and STM, most recently specializing in issues around peer review, DEI, and research integrity. Kim is a COPE Council member, a founding member of the Joint Commitment for Action on Inclusion and Diversity in Publishing, and participates in many cross-functional working groups, including the STM Integrity Hub and C4 Disc. Next, we have Laura Wilson, Head of Research Integrity and Ethics at Taylor & Francis. Thank you, Laura, for coming for this session, and a warm welcome. Laura Wilson is Head of Research Integrity and Ethics at the Taylor & Francis Group. Laura has worked in the journals publishing industry for the last 13 years and has previously served as a board member for the International Association of Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers, as well as a council member for the Committee on Publication of Ethics, that is COPE. Thanks again, Laura. Next, we have Elizabeth Moylan, Publisher, Research Integrity, and Publishing Ethics at Wiley. Elizabeth drives projects in open research and related policy. She also works closely with colleagues in Wiley's Integrity in Publishing Group, providing support on research integrity and publishing ethics issue. She's an editorial board member for Research Integrity and Peer Review, and is an advisory board member for 2 EU-funded projects, Entire and Virtue, that aim to support researchers in upholding and practicing the principles of research integrity. Elizabeth completed a PhD and postdoctoral training at the University of Oxford, UK. So welcome again, and thank you so much. A quick intro about me. I am Anupama Kapadi, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm a licensed specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation, orthopedics by qualification, and a scholarly publication professional by vocation. I've been working in the scholarly publishing industry for the last 16 years now, and I actively mentor and train academic professionals in the writing and editing fields. I've led several projects related to fulfilling newer requirements of clients and publishers by enhancing the editorial peer review systems and author services for Inago. I'm a member of COPE, ISMTE, EASE, ISMPP, MAPS, and ISCR, which focus on the betterment of scholarly communications, specializing in medical communications, because that's my background. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming for this session. And a quick note here for the audience. The discussions held within this panel are solely based on expert opinions and should be construed as such. They do not supersede or replace any individual research, personal judgment, professional advice, or any legally binding regulations. The material is free to share, of course, non-commercial and share alike. If the material has to be reused anywhere, please take prior permissions. And that's it. So, yeah, again, for the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions at the Q&A section below that you can see on your screen. And our team will be able to help you. But also, I'll be able to share the questions with the panel so that they can answer your questions in a timely manner. And with that, let's begin the session. All right. So, I mean, we are all here to discuss the innovations in peer review, which necessitates the idea that there is something wrong with traditional peer review, or maybe it's outdated, maybe it needs some innovation, maybe it needs change, right? Nothing can remain constant over a large period of time, and we have to evolve with change. So let's first discuss with the panel what are the challenges faced in traditional peer review. And here I would like to invite all the panelists to share their opinion. Yes, so what are the common challenges that are faced by the traditional peer review model? Laura, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can do. Hi, everyone. I think everyone is probably well versed on a lot of the challenges we see in traditional peer review. So things like the length of time taken, potential things around reviewer bias in terms of how they assess that piece of work. And I think one of the biggest challenges Taylor and Francis are facing is how do we adapt traditional peer review in the face of kind of the exploding volume of research output we're now seeing? How do we keep pace with that competition, increased competition for peer reviewers? I will hand over to my fellow experts.
Elizabeth, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would just like to build on that point that Laura made about bias and the potential for bias. And we all have, our own personal biases.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the sort of challenges with what we might call traditional peer review or single anonymous peer review, where the authors are known to the reviewers, but the reviewers aren't known to the authors. And there is that potential for bias, and how do you address that? And I think we might go on to discuss a little bit more in this session about the different models of peer review that can address that bias. So things like double anonymous peer review, where the author identity is also hidden from the reviewers to remove that source of bias. And another way of addressing bias is with more openness in peer review, so bringing more transparency into the process and making it more accountable. So there's a few points from me, and I'll hand over to Kim.
Yes, Kim.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I would agree, and I wanted to pick up on the first point that Laura made was about speed. This is the number one thing that authors complain about, at least in my experience. It's also the number one thing that reviewers complain about, because it's too slow for authors, but it's too fast for reviewers. So there is a real tension there for everybody in the process. Nobody's happy with the speed, but nobody wants it to speed up or slow down either. I would also echo that point about bias and to an extent diversity. I think in traditional peer review, we see editors reluctant to use reviewers they don't know. So as a result, they're using the same people again and again. And that means the reviewer pool itself never gets any bigger, never gets any more diverse. And that reviewer pool gets really tired and really fed up. And you tend to see the same names and, as a result, the same arguments and the same direction of travel in terms of subject discipline. So I think there's a big challenge for us in terms of being a bit more open to change and diversifying our reviewer communities, because I think that's how science really, truly grows. There are a lot of valid criticisms of peer review, no question, but I don't know if anybody's hit on the perfect solution yet. Our job is, I think, to find the least worst and go from there.
Nice, interesting. So we have author bias, we have speed, we have reviewer diversification, which means there is reviewer bias also when you say when editors tend to choose or select certain reviewers over the others. I think some of the models that we're going to be discussing would probably pose as solutions, but if it's only taken up by, a lot of publishers and in a collaborative manner, I think it's very difficult for maybe one publisher or one set of scholarly stakeholders to, take a stance. I think it needs to be like a coalition or a group where we work collaboratively with probably, some of the authors or some of the senior authors, especially from institutions. I think that is something that we can discuss later down. What do you think about, are there any gender biases also among peer reviewers, or is it only related to, say, geography, or what have you observed in, in your tenures, in your, particular jobs, etc.? So any tidbits there?
We at IOP have collected quite a bit of data on this, and we're hoping to have a preprint out shortly.
Okay.
There is, in the single anonymous method, as Elizabeth mentioned, that's kind of the traditional, at least in science, STM publishing, that's the traditional method. There is definitely geographical bias. To a lesser extent, there is gender bias, and we see in single anonymous, men are more likely to have their work accepted than women. When you apply double anonymous peer review, that completely changes, and women are more likely to have their work accepted than men. So there is gender bias. There's also reputation bias. So being influenced by the reputation of the person that's written the review, maybe their H index, or how well known they are, how prolifically published they are. So I think there's three, those would be the three main types of bias for me: geographical, gender, and then reputation or prestige bias.
That's quite interesting also. So when we discuss about integration of AI later on, I think we can maybe also discuss peer reviewer selection. I think that is probably the easiest solution that AI can provide compared to, actual scientific evaluation of manuscripts, which is probably currently lacking right now from an AI point of view. But thank you so much. Anybody else have anything to add? Okay, all right. So what we will next do is I would like the audience actually to tell us what are their perceptions. So yeah, those are the questions on your screen, audience. What is the major point for you as a researcher that prevents contribution to journal peer review process? Your options are unfamiliarity with peer review models, underconfidence with English communication, lack of training on how to peer review, lack of motivation and incentives to peer review, and limited opportunities or invitations to review. So you have 2 minutes to vote. Your voting process starts now. All right, I would like predictions from the panel. Elizabeth, do you have any predictions? We'll go with you first. What do you think the audience will go with the majority?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to know more about the audience demographics and who's with us today. And I suspect we may have some early career researchers on the line. So I'd be interested to see if they're having opportunities to peer review and wondering a little bit about, oh my goodness, how do I do it? And could training be an issue for them as well, that to give them confidence to do it? I don't know.
No, I mean, see, all options are probably, likely, but yeah. Okay, we'll go with training and limited opportunities. Kim, Laura, what do you guys think?
I agree with Liz's predictions. Okay. I think training is probably a big point, but I do think that lack of motivation and incentives to peer review.
Right.
I would expect that to rank pretty highly, particularly if, as Liz says, we've got some early career researchers on here too.
Yes, we have actually some early career researchers. I think our attendee count is around 120 now, and I see a lot of early career researchers from different countries now. Kim, would you like to take a go? Or do you agree
I
with Laura and Ellis?
I agree. I think lack of incentives and motivation. There's a lot of talk in the industry right now about
Okay.
how do we expand the reviewer pool? How do we reward and incentivize reviewers? So I think for me, that would probably be the most common one.
All right. Let's see what the audience has said. Can we close the poll and display the results? Aha. Yes. Yes, 76 people have voted. 34% have voted lack of motivation and incentives to peer review, closely followed by limited opportunities and lack of training. So I think all good guesses, and it's good that we know this and we can predict this. And it's actually this. I mean, there is no gap, in the assessment. So now we just have to bridge the gap somehow. All right. I think I'll take an audience question right now. I see a question. Yes, this question is from Juliana. She says, does the news, I don't understand the question clearly, but Juliana, feel free to correct me. Does a peer review, I think she means to say, will peer review ever be a paid job? Authors spend a lot of time or high amounts to publish, and reviewers do not earn for that work. So I think that's her question, if I have understood her correctly. What do you think? What do you think, Laura?
I think it's an absolutely fair point, and I think it's something that, as Kim just mentioned, is a big discussion at the moment within the industry about how can we start to recognise and reward reviewers. I think that publishers have a key role to play in this, but I think also institutions do. So yeah, there are those monetary considerations, but I don't think we necessarily want to build a culture where you only review if you get paid, because then you get professional reviewers, and is that necessarily what the review process is meant to be? But I think there's a big part for us to address as an ecosystem around recognizing the time and effort that reviewers put into work, so that reviewing as an activity is held as a similar standard to the amount of articles you've published. But I'll open the floor to Kim and Liz.
Yes. Liz, what do you think?
Just looking for the unmute. Yes, I think Sense About Science did a big survey a while ago looking into peer review and this sort of issue. In actual fact, I think they found that a lot of reviewers didn't want a monetary reward for peer review, recognise the sort of reciprocal nature of the fact that, as authors, they would need peer review, and then they would also put that back into the system and peer review other researchers' work. However, as Laura said, recognition for the work done is a big part of it. And I'm curious to see, we don't have an institutional representative on the panel, but if we recognise work done in terms of peer review reports to publishing an article and build that into the incentive structure, institutions, that might be good. And also, again, other ways of recognising peer review. So by opening up the process, if I publish a peer review report on Kim's manuscript, for example, but I make such a valid point that Laura goes on to cite my peer review just as much as Kim's article, then I'm getting recognition for the contribution I've made.
Right. Yes. And I think if there is some credit system or something that contributes to their tenure or their position that they currently hold, I think a lot of researchers wouldn't mind that in lieu of monetary or commercial, gains, basically. So anything that helps them in their profession or their caliber or, overall profile is what they probably want. They want a more public acknowledgement, and a formal public acknowledgement that basically their stats or their the number of published papers that can be attributable to them, and so on and so forth. All right. Kim, would you like to add something? Or
I completely agree with what Elizabeth and Laura have said. I think for a commercial publisher, it may be that offering monetary reward is possible. I'm representing a scholarly publisher where we're a non-for-profit, we're society-based. It would absolutely destroy us as as an entity. So we couldn't ever really afford to do that unless we passed the cost on to our
The
authors,
authors.
which would mean that article processing charges got higher or subscriptions got higher. So I don't think you can apply the same standards across all publishers.
Right.
I also think there's issues with offering payment, because you then have to say, well, what's a good enough review to warrant payment and what's not good enough? And that can be very, very, very depending on discipline. So I think there's a lot to be worked out. I completely agree with Laura. I think it changes the culture about why people are doing peer review.
Right.
And ultimately, there are systems in place now. Publons, which was recently taken over by Web of Science, is a great example. There's another one called Reviewer Credits, where reviewers can collect their peer reviewing activity and actually have something to show to their supervisors or their institution to say, look, I'm contributing in all these different ways. But until institutions recognize and reward that activity, we're really in a difficult position. Some of the things that I think are great that companies, including my own, are trying to do, offering discounts. So when somebody does a review for us, they get 10% off an article processing charge with us. And they also get access to free training courses and those kind of things that we offer. So there's other ways I think we can incentivize besides cash that are a bit less problematic.
Yes, completely agree. I think that's a good segue into our next section, which is emerging peer review models. Let's go to the first question. Yes. So we talk about preprints, right? And generally preprints are not peer reviewed is what the public understanding is. The published articles in journals are peer reviewed, but preprints are not. Also, the preprint volume has gone up significantly in the last decade or so. I think a recent report that I read in Scientometrics, it has gone up by 40% in the last 5 years alone. Thanks or no thanks to COVID, but yes, that is the case. So yes, how can we balance the speed of preprints with robust peer review, especially in fast-moving fields? So this is a question that we'd like to discuss with this panel, starting with Kim. Would you like to throw some light on this?
It's a really good question. There are not enough reviewers in the world to peer review everything that's currently available as a preprint. It's not possible. So there has to be some element of selectivity. And that selectivity is, I think, most easily done at scale when it's organized. And that's ultimately the role that publishers are playing. Are they selecting which articles are warranting peer review? So everything that gets submitted to us goes through that initial desk check that says, yes, this is worthy of peer review. Now we'll send it out to our community. I think the speed is a real challenge. Post-publication review is a potential solution to this problem, in that you could put everything out there and say, you read it and you comment on it. The difficulty for me anyway, and I think my fellow panelists would probably agree, given that they all work in research integrity, is that if that work isn't reliable, it's too late. It's already out there. And that, there are people reading that work that aren't necessarily checking whether it was peer reviewed. They're not checking that the data supports the conclusions. They're assuming that because it's on the internet, it's truth. And I think that's really problematic. There's a lot of cleaning up to do if that were the case. So I also don't think the incentive structure of academia has caught up with post-publication peer review either. I don't know if institutions recognize something as published if it wasn't peer reviewed before publication. So I think there's a lot of challenges with that method. There's some advantages as well, but I think that selectivity before it gets that stamp of approval is really important. The challenge for us in publishing is, how do we do it faster? And that's partly about embracing automation. So using things like AI to make our systems and our processes go faster, being open to working with a wider variety of people, so diversifying our reviewer pool, and ultimately perhaps putting a bit more money into this process as well to make things go faster. Yeah.
Completely. From a preprints point of view, does it also make sense to make it more selective from the point of view of them, publishing the research on their archives? So currently that process is not very selective, as we know. The quality as well as the veracity of research is not verified, by experts or anything like that. So do you think that is the starting point, or is that going back to square one where we did not have preprint archives at all? What do you think?
I think that's recreating the journal industry ultimately by saying you have to go through some kind of selection process to have your work made available is basically what we're doing in journal publishing.
Right.
And we're having, at least 2 people with subject knowledge assess the validity of the article before it's published. So I can almost see us recreating the wheel a little bit if we do that. There's a lot of value in preprints, but
yes,
I just think there's got to be a recognition that this work hasn't been verified and peer reviewed yet, and therefore it shouldn't be taken as truth.
Okay, all right. I think there's a related question by an audience member. Satoshi-san is asking, do preprints reduce the impact of research? Liz or Laura, would you like to take this question? What do you think? Do preprints reduce the impact of research?
I'm happy to answer this. So I think preprints aren't anything new for many disciplines. They're part of that kind of manuscript journey, particularly when we think about things like physics and biology. Anecdotally, I have no data on this. I have seen no evidence that preprints can reduce the impact of research. I think that the points Kim has made are very valid, that people should be sensitive potentially about the preprints, about the potential for public harm and misinformation by mistake. But I've seen no evidence to suggest they reduce the impact of research.
Okay. Liz, do you agree, or have you seen otherwise?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify a point because I'm just seeing the questions in the chat that,
Yes.
A preprint is the early posting of a manuscript. So you can put your work out there on a preprint server that's related to your subject area, and you can say, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm showing to you all. It can be a way of getting early feedback, if you like, before submitting to a journal, or it can just be a means to itself. Some people post a preprint and might never submit it to a journal. So that's the point of preprint servers, and I think the greatest point that they address, and it's going to come up, is speed. The fact that I can post a preprint now, get my work out there, I can submit it to a journal, it can be peer reviewed and hopefully published in the journal. The preprint server could be updated to say, and now this work is here, whatever journal it's in. So I have no problem with preprints, and as long as it's transparent that the work is not peer reviewed, that's fine. And I don't think they would impact, on impact either. If anything, they might gain more eyes on the paper. You might get excellent feedback on the preprint, as well as what's going on in peer review, to even improve your final published article.
Yes, I've also seen authors getting collaborations based on their preprints. So I think other authors who are also doing similar research tend to reach out to preprint authors and say, let's collaborate for the next leg of research. So that's also a benefit. So yes, so the answer to this question is it hasn't reduced the impact of research. There is no data that says this. But yes, it has to be used very judiciously and wisely. We can go on to discussing the next model of peer review model, which is a collaborative peer review model. So the question to the panel is, how are publishers implementing collaborative peer review, and what are the challenges are they encountering? How can the academic stakeholders better value early career researchers and underrepresented voices in this process? Kim, would you like to take a go at this?
Yeah, there are lots of publishers now starting to offer collaborative peer review. Excuse me, the most well-known is probably Frontiers. where editors, reviewers and authors all work together to discuss and reach a consensus on any one given article. There are challenges to this method, especially when it includes people's identities, I think. Especially early career researchers can be a little bit nervous about sharing their identity. Some people can be more influenced, especially if there's maybe a junior colleague and a senior colleague working together. The junior colleague might disagree, but they're not going to do that publicly. So they'll actually just go along with whatever the senior colleague says. So there are some, it's not easy, it's not straightforward. At IOP, where I work, we've implemented something called co-review. So we might send a reviewer an invitation to somebody, but they can choose to work together with another colleague to review that paper together. And that's a really good way we've found of colleagues kind of learning on the job how to do a good review and getting some real-time feedback from a colleague. And we also give feedback to those reviewers as well when they've been through that process, because we recognize it's going to have been their first time that they've reviewed. And we've really started to see that option grow in popularity, especially with early career researchers who want to review. There's a lot of benefits in reviewing. You're the first people in a lot of cases to see this research. A lot of people really enjoy and get a lot out of reviewing, but it is a skill, and it's a skill that you can't always learn theoretically. You need to learn by doing it. And so I think the option of co-review is a really nice alternative to collaborative review.
Yeah, I've not heard of co-review so far, so it sounds so interesting. I mean, I think it's also an opportunity to learn from the reviewer, who presumably is more experienced than you and can give you feedback. So it's almost like a training or a counseling session that you might have with that person. That sounds really interesting. So yeah, kudos to IOP for starting this. Laura, would you like to add anything on this point?
Yeah, I think so TNF, we also do that kind of co-reviewing, trying to treat it as a bit of a mentorship kind of scheme for supervisors to bring someone in on that review. And the same as IOP, really making sure that that co-reviewer gets the credit for that review as well, so they can add it to Publons, all of those things. And I guess it's not technically collaborative peer review, but I know a lot of publishers have obviously things like authors being able to respond to reviewer comments in that progression of the manuscript. And also, it sounds like a really minor point, but we've had really good feedback about it, is when a decision is made on the paper, sharing with both those reviewers the recommendations that their fellow reviewer made in the reviewer report, because I think that's a really good learning exercise. And in terms of the challenges we've seen, is a lot of the similar challenges we see in traditional peer review, that time is a big factor. Really thinking about those hierarchy points that Kim made, that people are sometimes hesitant to criticize someone more senior than them. And again, just that limited number of reviewers, but hopefully co-reviewing is a really good incentive to try and boost some of that.
That's nice. And also from a co-review point of view, I think it's not, again, very a known concept. So if it's an option that is made available to researchers, and if they know that they have this, I think a lot more researchers would come forward and provide suggestions and things like that. So because, I mean, they just know that the publisher is just open to discussion rather than it just being a closed wall. So, well, that's again a segue to the next question that we have. What is the impact of open peer review on transparency and trust in science? And of course, what are its potential drawbacks? Liz, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. So in my earlier career, I worked at Biomed Central, and I was an editor there and responsible for inviting peer reviewers to review manuscripts. And the medical journals all had open peer review, and the biology journals all had single anonymous peer review. And I should stop right there and back up and say, what do we mean by open peer review? Because it can mean all sorts of different things in terms of whether we're talking about publishing reviewer comments, So openness on content, or are we also publishing reviewer names? So are we being open about reviewer identities? And that was the case at Biomed Central, where reviewer comments were published if the article was published with their names associated with them. And I think the great thing about openness is it did increase accountability into the decision-making process for what those reviewers said and how the editors acted. And it did make people, and I think this is quite intuitive, really back up what they say with evidence. So if you're going to critique somebody, you will be a bit more courteous, a bit more polite, a bit more constructive. And we definitely saw those qualities come out as well. And I think so. I think they're the great benefits. Perhaps the drawbacks are people who are not comfortable in revealing their identity. And sometimes we hear this particularly from early career researchers who might feel that might impact on their career later down the line. I think we can only advise if you do things in a really polite and courteous way, hopefully, you can be critical in that environment, just as you would in a conference environment where a speaker gives a talk and you put your hand up and say, oh, did you try that? Or how about that method? Yeah, so that's a few thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting how you drew a parallel between, written communication and oral communication, verbal communication. I think when you're generally talking face to face, you tend to apply a lot more courtesy. And I think if you don't know the researcher, obviously, and then if you're writing comments, you tend to not put those niceties inside. And you don't know whether the researcher is early career or not, and what impact does this feedback have on them. But yes, of course, I think even if the reviewer tends to suppose they make mistakes, and if they have done it very courteously, I think, there will not be a lot of backlash also. Just one quick personal example. One of the authors that we were helping a couple of years ago, they received a lot of harsh comments from the reviewer, and the author put it up on social media. And then later, a couple of other researchers pointed out that the feedback was in fact incorrect. And then the publisher had to take some note of this. I mean, this all could just be avoided by a little bit of, basically calm feedback manner that you just said, if that comes into the picture. So thanks for that, Liz. Let's go to one of the questions that we initially addressed. So let's have the next question on the slide. How can peer review evolve to help address disparities in review outcomes related to affiliations, language, and development indices? This is something we briefly touched upon when we began the session, but I just want us to, discuss this in detail, starting with Kim. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so we at IOP, we publish physics journals. Physics has always worked on the single anonymous method, so the authors don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers do know who the authors are. And we would typically see, I would say, scholars from the global north being accepted more than the global south. We would see men being more accepted than women. We would see people with a higher H index or better reputation being accepted more than people with a low H index. And one thing we wanted to try and do was, exactly as this question states, is try and give everybody the same chance of outcome, that the science is really just judged on merit. It's just about the science. It's not about who did the science, it's the science itself. And so we ran some experiments going back as far as 2018, looking at, well, if we use the double anonymous method where the reviewers don't know who the author is, what difference does that make to acceptance rates? And it does make a really big difference for those really prestigious high H index people. Their work is less likely to be accepted when their name is not there, which suggests that maybe people are giving them the benefit of the doubt or being more positive about their work because of who they are rather than because of the work itself being great. We see the opposite effect for people with a low H index. So their work is more likely to be accepted if they anonymize. their work. And the same applies across geography. So although interestingly not to the same extent, when we look at regional differences, let's take scholars from Africa, for example, they usually would have a very, very low acceptance rate in our journals under the single anonymous method. It was about 17%, I think, chance of having their work accepted. Under the double anonymous method, that jumps to 32%. So that's nearly twice as likely to have their work accepted if the reviewer doesn't know who's written the work. And I don't think it's as easy as saying, well, that means all reviewers are biased, but it means that there's probably something in there. Then it might be a combination of multiple different things, like geography, like reputation, like gender, that's all coming together to influence reviewers' perceptions to an extent. So what we found through those trials of offering double anonymous was that for gender, geography and reputation, it really does go away in combating some of the bias that we see in peer review. And so I would say that the double anonymous method for me has been the most effective, but I absolutely hear what Liz has been saying about open peer review and the courteousness that you see in reviews when that's applied. And we've started now publishing reviews as well. So without revealing the identities of the reviewers, unless they agree to it, hopefully we've got the best of both worlds. They can't be biased before acceptance because they don't know who the authors are. But at the end of the process, if they've put their name to it anyway, they'll be judged by the review that they've written because it will go online with the article. So that hopefully kind of does both in a way. Not perfect, but getting there.
Yeah, and I also see a perfect question, at this point, again from Satoshi-san. They ask, double-blinded and open peer reviews, which one can attain a fairer peer review process? So it's a difficult question, generally speaking, because I think both of them have their own pros and cons. But at this point, what do you think? Laura, we'll take your opinion first. What do you think? Which one is fairer, so to speak?
I knew you were going to come to me. I think that it's a brilliant question, but it's a hard one. I think, as full disclosure, at Taylor and Francis, we have a variety of journals that have double anonymous. We have many in science areas that have single anonymous. We have some journals who are piloting what Kim has just described. So they're double anonymous, but they publish the review reports at the end. And then just to add into the mix, we have the F1000 platform, which is obviously open research and fully open review.
Right.
And which one attains fairer peer review? I don't think I have an answer. I think there are biases in all of them, to be honest, because open peer review can be shaped by the fear that your name is going on that review report, so you might cushion language you might have otherwise used. And I guess, I think there's merit to all of them. And I guess it depends on the discipline. It depends on the way the paper is handled at that particular journal. And it depends on how much effort has gone into the diversification of that reviewer pool as well. I would like to hand over to my fellow experts at this point.
Yes. Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and we could probably unpick it a bit and say, well, what do you mean by fair? To the points that Kim made about, not about judging the quality of the research, not the author, then you could argue that double anonymous is more fair. But if you were to say, in terms of, I don't know, recognition for the peer reviewer who did the work and, publishing that report, you might say that open models are more fair and they're more, accountable for what they've said. And I love the fact that you can have the best of both worlds. I think that's great. So I think the jury is out. I don't think any one model can be more fair or win out in the end.
Yes. So I think because no one model is perfect, there is no clear winner. But I think retrospectively, if data is analyzed and if there is any sign of unfairness from an author point of view or a reviewer point of view, the models can probably be switched around. So for example, if we, like Kim said, the example from Africa. So basically, if the publisher notices that at the end of the year, we've not even received, 5 to 10% of the submissions that we generally receive from this region, then maybe, switch up the model to something else and then see what is fairer to the authors from that region. I think it's all about using the model, from a custom point of view, depending on the reviewers available, the discipline, and the volume of work coming in each discipline. So I think a lot of flexibility can probably be given to the medicine, the biosciences, the physical sciences, where generally a lot of volume comes in terms of research. And a custom option can be created for social sciences, for example, where I think the pool of reviewers is also limited, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something we've gotten feedback from different authors and researchers also. But yeah, thanks for keeping this point alive. Let's go to the next question. Because we are talking about different models of peer reviews, and we also slightly touched upon standardization of peer reviews, I'd like to know from the panel, what are your views on structured peer reviews? And have you encountered any examples or instances for this? Laura, would you like to say something about this?
Yeah, so we have a number of journals that use structured peer reviews. So for anyone who's not aware, a structured peer review is basically kind of a set of questions where the editor will guide that reviewer to particular areas of focus that they want the reviewer to pull out of that article. And it can be really helpful, we have found, for early career researchers or those new reviewers who don't potentially have a mentor in the lab who's going to show them how to do a review report. However, on the flip side, we have some journals where a structured peer review report would be their worst nightmare because they would feel like they're putting reviewers in the box and telling them what to say.
Right.
And the other thing that we have got on the F1000 platform is, depending on the article type, they will get a different reviewer question. So an opinion piece will get a very different set of questions to think about versus a research article. And we found that they can be really helpful in steering reviewers away from focusing on language issues. So they're only commenting on the standard of English or the word count and not focusing on the content of the article. So it can be quite useful, but as I say, we do have journals where it's their worst nightmare and they will never do it. So.
That's an interesting take. Yes. I think from a structured peer review point of view, one benefit that is there, it's training, right? I mean, you get easily trained on how to peer review if you have a structure in front of you, I think. So that's probably a benefit for early career researchers. Probably speeds up the process of learning and training for peer review. So completely agree. On that note, let's go to the next slide. And this was a special readership poll that we conducted at Inago Academy for the peer review week. We had more than 3,000 votes for this poll, and we asked the readers, according to you, which of the following peer review trends will have the most impact on the future of publishing? And this is what they had to say. So a majority of them voted for open peer review. So they are open to open peer review. And it is closely followed by collaborative peer review, which is probably co-reviews that we're talking about, and AI integrated peer review. So these are the three most popular options. I think related to this, there was a comment from an audience member, not a question, but they say, open strikes me as the most or the more progressive approach. Everybody has biases, so let's get them out of the open and find ways to tackle them. Good science depends on transparent and constructive collaboration between researchers. I think we agree, the panel agrees. So thanks for that comment, Christopher. All right. Moving on to our next section, which I'm sure is a favorite with the panel, considering they're all heading research integrity. Let's move on to the first question under research integrity section. Yeah. What are the etiquettes, or what etiquettes do editors and publishers seek in reviewers when you select reviewers? What should reviewers do if they notice something concerning in a paper? So this is the question. Laura, would you like to take a go at this first?
So obviously publishers and editors are very grateful for all reviewers we have. I think etiquette, kind of core etiquette from my perspective, is that we would always like reviewers to respect the confidentiality of the peer review process, so not sharing that manuscript with anyone else without prior permission from the journal, trying to be objective in comments and constructive rather than personal, and really reading the paper, focusing on the content, and recusing themselves if they have a conflict of interest, so like a competing interest on that paper. And finally, I think a really important bit of reviewer etiquette is only accepting the invite to review if you have the time to do it and you think you can do it in a timely way and that you have the subject experience for that paper. In terms of what reviewers should do if they notice something concerning, if it's something that you think is concerning but it's a minor point, always would encourage them to put it in the comments to editor field or to let the editor know. If it's something that's so egregious that the reviewer thinks peer review should stop, contact the editor or the editorial office directly and let them know of your concerns, again in really nice, neutral, objective language.
That helps, Laura. Liz, would you like to add on?
I think Laura has covered it so comprehensively that I agree with all her points. I would just flag COPE has ethical guidelines for peer review, which, you know, might be of interest to this audience in speaking to those points that Laura mentioned.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding us. I think the Enago Academy team, please send out a link to all our attendees to the COPE website so that they can take a look at all the workflows that the association has published. So yes, I mean, these are some of the etiquettes that, the reviewers and editors can observe. Let's go to the next question that the panel would like to discuss. What are the emerging threats or common pitfalls that reviewers should be aware of to uphold research integrity? And how can reviewers mitigate these? We've already discussed a few points, just now related to the previous question. But I think primarily this question is some things, we should cover some things that the reviewers should take note of, especially early career researchers. So yes, Laura, again, back to you. What do you think?
So I think I've touched on some of these in my earlier answers,
Yes.
but I think, again, not making accusations. So if you think someone has plagiarized, not putting that in your reviewer report, kind of reframing it in a slightly more neutral way. I think one of the biggest issues that we see, and I think this is up to publishers to educate reviewers a lot more, and it comes down to institutional practices as well, is for reviewers not to use the process of review as an opportunity to promote their own works. So asking for citations to their own articles or to their friends' articles, that's a real bugbear that we have. And from an ethics perspective, we have a lot of issues where reviewers have shared manuscripts with other people who've then done something with that manuscript, like publish it under their own names. So I think that's something to be really mindful of. But I will hand over to Liz and Kim.
Yes. Kim, would you like to go next? Do you have any other points related to this?
I completely agree. I think the thing we probably see most commonly that's problematic for us is that promotion of their own work, and that they're not really fully engaging with the paper that they've been asked to review. It's just been maybe a slightly superficial review, but please add these 5 references to all my work. That is the biggest problem that we see, and we've started taking that really seriously at IOP now. We will not use those reviewers again, and we will, if it's really, really bad, we might even report them to their institution. So we're having to take a bit of a hard line because it does seem to be it's growing, which I understand everybody's under pressure to publish and get citations to their work, but there's the right way to do it. So that's the only emphasis I would give.
So do you have a mechanism in which the authors can report back to you if they encounter such, unethical maybe?
Not specifically a mechanism for that, but whenever we send a reviewer report out to an author, the author's always asked to reply.
Okay.
And so we will always go through those replies and ask the authors, and if we see anything in that author reply, then we would pick that up.
Okay, all right. That sounds good. Yeah, let's go to the next question. How can open peer review models strike a balance between transparency and privacy of peer reviewers now, since we're talking about research integrity? Liz, over to you.
I think we've touched on this a little in our earlier conversations about open peer review models and what we might mean by open. So there are different ways of increasing the transparency of the peer review process. At Wiley, we've been experimenting for the last 5 years, increasing transparency in peer review. And we give review on those journals which offer transparent peer review. So should the manuscript be published, then the report content, author's responses and editor comments are published alongside. We do offer the option whether reviewers would like to sign or not. So I guess that kind of gets at this balance a little bit. And interestingly, about 30%, a bit over 30, 39, I think, is the kind of current rate of reviewers signing their report. So you can see that it's not really popular. You know, the majority of reviewers don't sign under those conditions.
Okay.
But at least they're sharing the report content to the public as well. And that, you know, it's interesting to see how much the peer review histories are looked at and you know, and explored. So maybe does that help strike a balance in this tricky area where we're all striving for more openness, and maybe that allows that some privacy as well?
Yes. And I think it's a change for the peer reviewers themselves that they have to adapt to. So I hope the number was lower before and now it's 39%, and that means there is progress.
I think it depends very much on the subject area and the community. I'd be interested, you know, in Kim's experience, whether physicists are more comfortable in that area or not. It tends to be, I think, anecdotally, I used to see most ecologists and evolutionary biologists spontaneously signing their report, even though they didn't have to. That's just anecdotal from my experience.
Yeah, I was just, when you said 39%, I was like, ours is 40. So it's really, really similar. There is a slight preference in, it's all physics, but we have some subjects in the periphery. So maybe climate science and environmental science, and maybe bioscience is slightly more open-minded to actually signing their work. But when we talk about real, like, core physics, maths, materials science, nope, not particularly engaged with it at all. And it may be that they're just on a slower change journey than other disciplines. But we definitely do see difference by discipline in a lot of the different trials and experiments that we run. Some communities are just a bit more open-minded, and others are really, really not. They like the way things work and don't want to change it.
It'd be interesting to know the reasons, I think, by discipline and even by culture, maybe. So I think in some cultures, anyway, you know, people, or forget researchers, but just general people, they're not very open to, you know, sharing things in public, etc. So that may just translate onto their research profiles. But it'd be interesting to know the reasons. There's a related question to the panel. Has anyone yet conducted a meta-analysis of transparent peer review data? Has this been done to your knowledge?
That I'm aware of.
Okay.
Well, I'm also, we're all grasping with the terminology. What do we mean by meta-analysis? So I've done, because, you know, open research and more open models of peer review has been a bit of a passion of mine. We have reported on our experiences at Wiley when we, you know, adopted more transparent models of peer review in terms of, you know, how many reviewers did it take to review a manuscript? Was there any impact on speed? That sort of thing. So I published a little bit in that area, if that's what we mean.
I think, so from this context, what I understand is basically some statistical analysis that would tell you the results of multiple studies related to transparent peer review data is what I think Chris was trying to ask. So I'm not sure if something like this was present in the link that you shared earlier, Liz, the Wiley link that you shared earlier.
That was more on the other side of the coin, which was double anonymous peer review, and that was really interesting. Speaking to Kim's points, and I think be interesting to see your results too, Kim. But we had a 3-year randomized controlled trial of double anonymous peer review at one journal. So you either had a manuscript doing single anonymous or double anonymous, and then you looked at what happened, and it's really interesting, those thoughts. Okay.
All right. So I think the answer is no. I don't think a detailed meta-analysis has been conducted for transparent peer review, but I think it's food for thought, maybe. If we have a good data set, a significant data set, then maybe we can come together and do this. But thanks for asking that question. I think it created a lot of buzz here in the panel. Let's move on to the next question. So what considerations should researchers be mindful of when integrating AI into the peer review process? And panel, what is your opinion on AI detection tools and their place in maintaining integrity, in terms of research integrity, of course? So Kim, would you like to take this?
You're going to regret coming to me first, because I have so many things to say about this. Firstly, I think we have to define what we mean by AI, because AI is a very, very broad term. There are some aspects of AI that are incredibly useful in the peer review process. For example, tools that help us find the best reviewer. So help us find somebody in that subject area who's really experienced, who's maybe already done some reviewing, perhaps at a different journal. There are tools there that are really, really helpful. Thinking about research integrity, there are tools now that help us identify when images have been manipulated or duplicated across different journals and published articles. So there's some phenomenal work and software coming out now. But there's also a note of caution when we're talking about generative AI, so large language models like ChatGPT is probably the best known example. And there have been cases of both authors using ChatGPT to generate papers and reviewers using it to generate reviewer reports. There's a value, excuse me, there's a value in ChatGPT, especially if you're not confident in your own writing ability, especially maybe if English isn't your first language. It can be really helpful in drafting, but what it should not be used for is creating. And I think that's where publishers are really concerned that if people are having content generated by these tools and then passing it off as their own, like who's verifying that that's correct? We know that ChatGPT will make up references. So there is a real risk, I think, with generative AI. There are benefits to it as well, but it needs to be used in a very considered way. And I think it really, what we're all asking at the moment as publishers and some of the third party, like industry bodies like COPE, are also asking is transparency. If you've used a tool like this, let us know where and how and what were the prompts that you provided, and then we can assess it completely fairly. But there is, I think, some risks. And so I would always be really cautious if you're thinking about using anything like ChatGPT when you're authoring or reviewing. Make sure you're familiar with the journal guidelines and what's expected, and make sure that you declare any kind of usage.
Those are some solid points, Kim. Laura?
Yeah, obviously, I completely agree with Kim on this. And I think we need to try as well, I think, given all the scary news stories, is not to succumb to a panic about AI that like a little bit of ChatGPT use leads to the rise of the Terminator. I don't think we need to go down that route. But I just want to pick up on a point about the peer review process itself, is that, and I think this is fairly standard for most publishers, is that we don't want reviewers to upload manuscripts that they're reviewing into these large language models, because
Absolutely.
that is technically that kind of breach of confidentiality. We're not entirely clear how those platforms might store that data. That will ChatGPT or Bard start regurgitating what's been uploaded to them, and also reviewers don't have the rights to upload those manuscripts. So I think that's something that we all need to be really mindful of as well.
Yes, and that also sort of bears into the research integrity that we were discussing, by reviewers. So it's not their research that they could do anything that they want, including uploading those manuscripts on LLMs that generally crawl public data. So those are good points, both of you. Yes, Liz, would you like to add something to this point?
I fully agree. They've covered it really comprehensively.
All right. Okay, audience, we have another poll for you next. Because we're talking about AI and we're talking about generative AI and ChatGPT in specific, we'd like to ask you this question. Who do you believe has the primary responsibility for addressing ethical and research integrity concerns associated with the use of AI tools like ChatGPT in academic publishing and peer review? Your options are individual researchers and peer reviewers, academic institutions and research organizations, journal publishers and editorial boards, AI developers and technology companies, regulatory bodies and policymakers. All stakeholders should share equal responsibility. So these are your options. And the poll, yes, the poll is right in front of you on your screen. You have 2 minutes to vote. And we're really, really interested in what the outcome of this poll would be. Any predictions, panel?
I think it's everybody's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect, it already is affecting so many different parts of our lives. And it's going to take more than one institution to come up with a policy. I think we have a collective responsibility here.
Okay. Kim says all stakeholders should share equal responsibility. Laura?
You'd think I'd know how to unmute myself by this point. So I do agree with Kim. So I think in the entire broad issue, everyone has a part to play. I think when it comes to, say, specific ethical concerns with regards to a manuscript that may have used ChatGPT or another AI, I think that's down to the researcher. But
Okay.
I'm interested to see the results.
All right. Okay. Liz?
Yeah, I would go with all stakeholders have a responsibility in the same way that I would argue that for research integrity as well.
All right. So what would be a close second according to you? Liz, what would be a close second? Yeah.
Yeah, the individual researchers being
Okay.
honest about what they're doing and using in terms of AI.
Okay. All right. Let's see what the audience has voted. Can we close the poll and display the results? Well, yes. 78 people have voted and 47% say all stakeholders should share equal responsibility. And yes, closely followed by individual researchers and peer reviewers. Actually, that option has peer reviewers too. So yes, so 27% for that. So yeah, I think this I think basically gives us a good understanding of what generally researchers think. So it's good that we're on the same page. I also think from the companies that develop AI, they also bear an equal responsibility to something like this, because dissemination of science affects all of us and not just the researchers and not just the publishers. So they have equal responsibility in launching something like this, and also helping institutions and publishers make guidelines such that the users use AI responsibly, and only then AI can prosper efficiently and not unethically, at least. So, all right, that was interesting. So that, I think, brings us into the next section in terms of AI integration and peer review. Let's go to the first question in this section. How should we define the responsibilities of authors, peer reviewers, and publishers in ensuring transparency in the use of AI? We just discussed that, authors should refer to journal guidelines. Most journals have guidelines by now for use of generative AI in terms of declaration primarily, And also, I think some of them also have generative AI detectors that they use in terms of tools. But I think this panel can discuss what maybe researchers do not know about or should be stressing about in terms of defining their responsibilities. So yes, I mean, this question I think can be answered by anyone on the panel. Laura, would you like to go first? Don't kill me for this.
Yeah, I can do. I think that this is something that we don't want to be static on, because it's something that's continuing to evolve. So I think continued education about the responsibilities of everyone involved with regards to the AI use is important. I think, as we touched on before, about being clear about legitimate use of AI. So as Kim described, when it becomes generative, making sure authors are clear according to those journal guidelines about how they should disclose it. And I know a number of publishers are also starting to implement submission questions. So upon submission, researchers are asked to disclose whether they've used, say, ChatGPT or something like that. And I think that a lot of this comes back to some of those traditional principles around authorship and just research integrity, that everyone knows that running your images through AI to doctor them is probably not appropriate. And the same with this coming to the crux of authorship, that, so for example, Taylor and Francis, we would not consider AI an author because it can't meet the criteria and responsibilities of authorship. And I think that's something that we need to continue to work with all the stakeholders in the system to educate everyone about what our responsibilities are.
Fantastic, Laura. Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think Kim also discussed this comprehensively, earlier, and Laura has made really good points. So I'm in agreement, and I just want to flag COPE's position statement on the use of AI tools, and again, that they cannot meet requirements for authors. I'll see if I can post that in the right place.
All right, that would help the audience. Kim, would you like to add something?
Not really. I think that there's, as we said, there's a collective responsibility here. You would hope that authors would declare it, but as you've mentioned in the question, we are seeing instances of papers being published where the authors haven't declared it. Nobody's noticed in peer review, and ultimately it's been published and we found out afterwards. I think we have a responsibility as publishers to act really quickly when that has happened and make sure we investigate and either correct or retract the work if that's appropriate. But I would also ask peer reviewers to be kind of mindful of the fact that ChatGPT is here now, and it's possible that an author may have used a tool like this, and so to look really carefully when you're reviewing articles for anything that seems, slightly too good to be true or doesn't quite make sense. If there's a reference that doesn't make sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but it might do. And so I would ask reviewers to just let publishers and editors know if they see anything slightly odd.
So I wonder if publishers are thinking of a system, because you generally would have repeat authors, specifically from the same discipline. A tool that analyzes the language quality or the writing quality from past papers. Suppose it says 70% or 80% native language proficiency or something like that, and suddenly you have 100% native language proficiency because you've used ChatGPT. And this sort of maybe automatically helps the editorial board, including the peer reviewers. This is a flag, basically, that this author has not submitted a near perfect English written paper in the past, but they have submitted now. So just look out for flags that could be auto-generated or AI-generated. So this is something maybe, it can be thought about for future, since we're discussing about the future of peer review. But I think it is very difficult for peer reviewers to also judge this. For sure. It's absolutely very difficult. And of course, authors are getting smarter, researchers are getting smarter, and the younger generation is a lot smarter than we give them, any credit for. I think they adapt really quickly. And ChatGPT has been here for a while, so I'm sure some people have already mastered it. But yeah, thanks for sharing those tips. Let's go to the next question. It's also related to AI integration, but also primarily publisher policies. So how do publisher policies regarding generative AI impact researchers? And how do you anticipate these policies evolving in the future? Because I'm sure that the first set of policies have been released by most of the publishers, but do you think it needs change or additions? Kim would like to start with you first.
We've probably answered it a bit already, mostly already actually, but I think Laura made a good point about these will evolve. They'll evolve in line with the technology. ChatGPT 4, for example, is going to be able to do a lot more than ChatGPT 3 can. So those policies will evolve. I think we also need to really be collaborative and working together. So, you know, I know lots of counterparts at other publishers, and we discuss this really regularly. You know, what does your policy say? And because that's going to help researchers, right? If we all have a different policy, then researchers are going to get very confused very quickly. I think it's important that we have kind of a collective industry response and that it's considered. Like you said, that, you know, there are varying groups within researchers, early career researchers, younger researchers are really digitally comfortable with these tools. They're using them, you know, much more maybe older researchers are not. So we've got to think about policies that suit everybody and maybe consult with our customers, our authors, our reviewers when we're creating those policies as well.
Yeah, it would be a good idea to, I think, just run a survey among your younger reviewers and ask them their experience as authors as well as reviewers and see what they have to say. I'm sure they have some interesting ideas that we have not thought of. So, yeah. Liz, would you like to add on to this question?
I think Kim's covered it so comprehensively. Yeah, I think I've got anything more to add. Okay.
So let's move on to the next question. And maybe, Liz, you can throw a little bit light on this. So for newer reviewers, because we want a lot of them, what advice and tips can be shared to navigate the evolving landscape of peer review in an AI-enhanced era? What should they be taking care of and what should they be wary of? So yeah, what do you think?
I can imagine it's very daunting as a new reviewer to tackle your first review report, and I would hope that you have a good mentor with your supervisor to do that in a collegiate manner. And as Kim and Laura mentioned, you know, co-reviewing something together is a good way of learning and, you know, but making sure you get recognition. I also agree with what Kim said earlier that, you know, using an AI tool to create the peer review report would be a no-no. So I wouldn't go down that route either. And we've all seen cases of where, you know, AI just makes things up or puts references in that are not real. So don't rely on an AI tool. I think, you know, work together with your supervisor. Take a look at COPE's ethical guidance for peer reviewers.
All right, those are really good tips. Laura, would you like to add on to something?
Yeah, I think they were really, really good tips. The only thing I would potentially add is that how to word it, we don't want reviewers to be suspicious that every submission they're asked to review is AI generated.
Excellent point. Yes.
I think it is quite rare. And I think we don't want them to be data sleuths or anything like that and start trying to investigate whether it was ChatGPT generated or anything like that. I think just focusing on your subject expertise, that's why you've been invited. And again, I just wanted to say something as well, that we don't want reviewers to feel pressured that they have to accept every invitation they receive. So it's about reviewers prioritizing their own time as well, that only say yes to reports that you feel you can deliver constructively and timely, again, punctually, again, because your resource is very valuable.
Definitely. I think all our new researchers here would definitely benefit from these tips. Yeah, and I think we are moving on to our last section for this session, envisioning the future of peer review. So we can have this open discussion on a couple of these questions. The first question is, what technologies are publishers eager to implement in the next few years? And do you anticipate any consequences of shifting away from traditional peer review models? So, Kim. What do you think?
Such a big question. There's lots of technology that I want to implement, and it can be at times frustratingly slow as an industry, I would say. But I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of research integrity tools, so detecting when things are not as they seem. And there's some really nice work going on with the STM Association, who are building some fantastic technologies to help us in that regard. The other thing that I'm really keen to see us do more of is going back right to the beginning of the session, talking about collaborative peer review. And if we, right now, most papers are assessed as a PDF or a Word document. And if we could move away from that kind of static file type to a more collaborative, the authors can work together on a collaborative platform. The reviewers can comment in line and sort of have a discussion with the authors. I think that would really carry us forward a lot. And I know lots of publishers are looking at this at the moment. There is, unfortunately, though, like I mentioned earlier, everybody's on a different path in terms of change. Some people really embrace change, others really don't. And I know from my personal experience, if we were to put something like that in, only a small proportion of our authors and reviewers would use it. It would grow over time. So I don't think there'll be any big sudden shifts or changes, because academia and publishing, we are not fast moving. But I do think that we will slowly evolve, and I hope into more of a collaborative peer review setup.
Definitely. I think we can move on to the next question too, because it's a larger question than just this one, and it may just encompass this. Where do you envision publishing and peer review to be in the next decade, if you have any predictions? Laura, what would you?
So I guess encompassing both of these questions.
Yes.
I think that publishers will continue to flex in their peer review models. I would like lots of experimentation, but there are certain disciplines where those traditional peer review models continue to work. In terms of technologies in the future, I do hope that peer review and the publication process will continue to build that trust in science and research and the progression of human knowledge. But I would like us to focus on, as Kim's already said, I'm just repeating what she said, is building more robust systems and workflows that are more inclusive and encourage diversity, as well as removing barriers, because I think there are certain journals or disciplines where we do have that kind of closed door, and I want those doors to be open. And yeah, just overall more robust workflows that will allow for greater speed and a more satisfying experience for everyone involved. But yeah, I share Kim's frustrations about how long that might take.
Definitely. I think those are some interesting points. Liz, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I'd echo what Kim and Laura have already said. I think it's always sort of fun in peer review week to have an opportunity to really chat peer review. And another thing is like the terminologies we all use. So I just wanted to call out NISO's standard terminology for using peer review, so that all, researchers in this audience, in the future can look at a Wiley journal and say, oh, it does that sort of peer review, and compare it with IOP and Taylor and Francis, because we're all talking the same language. So I think that's important. What do we mean by these different models of peer review? I think there's absolutely a role for technology, as Kim and Laura have said, and standardization of processes and ways in which publishers can support people to do peer review. But I don't think we're going to coalesce on one model to kind of win out. I think there's be a diversity of models, and I'd, as audience members have said, where's the evidence for how these different models are working?
Yes.
We need to learn and tweak them further. So yeah, I think the future is still bright for peer review.
Yes. I think as long as it's going to be custom and it's going to be open to change, a lot can happen in the peer review models. And in the beginning, I think we discussed that it's too slow for the authors and it's too fast for the peer reviewers. I think the first or the most important challenge is to bridge this gap. By getting a lot of authors to be peer reviewers, responsible peer reviewers, by giving them tools, the guidelines that they need, especially in an AI enhanced era. I think all of this would probably be, that is what we will see probably in the future of peer review and publishing. There is one question on generative AI that we can probably address because we have a few minutes left. There are people using generative AI to translate the manuscripts in their own language to those in English. Is this okay, or is this a yellow card? This may turn the manuscript into awkward language, they acknowledge, but what does the panel think? Can generative AI be used for translation? Or are there different guidelines for that?
I love this question.
Me too.
It's a really good question. I think it can, we're already, I use Google Translate all the time. Like, I find it really, really helpful. We've moved on, I think, from using human translators. We are using machine translation. I think that's absolutely fine. The key is declaring it. What did you use and where was it previously published and in what language? That's all I need to see as a publisher to be reassured that I know, who wrote the original, in what language, can I see it, and what have you used to translate it? As long as that's declared, I'm pretty happy.
I thought so. I mean, I think as long as you declare and as long as you're transparent and ethical about the translation process, I think it should be okay. If you are, of course, translating somebody else's paper, I'm not sure if that can happen in any case, but of course you need to take
Absolutely.
the permission. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for answering that question. I think that brings us to the end of the session. Are there any points or anything that we may have left out that the panel would like to share quickly with the audience, especially for early career researchers who want to be reviewers? So any tips, any last minute guides? Liz, would you like to share any tips?
I think we've covered a lot already. I think, yeah, get involved and talk to your supervisor.
All right, Liz's tip is to get involved with the supervisor. Laura?
Yeah, I would just say it's worth, I don't want to put all the onus onto early career researchers, but it's definitely worth exploring publisher websites. So TNF plug, we do a lot of reviewer boot camps and reviewer training, so people can become certified reviewers. But definitely worth, if there's a journal you're particularly interested in, look at their website or their publisher's website to see if those kind of opportunities are available too.
Really nice tip, Laura. Thanks. Kim?
Absolutely agree. Reach out to your supervisors, your colleagues, editors of journals that you know and like and trust, if you're keen to be a reviewer. And just like Taylor and Francis, we also have lots of information on our website, including a free e-learning course on how to be a reviewer. So do engage. And if you can't find the information you need, come and ask. People like myself and Laura and Elizabeth, and I'm sure lots of people at Inago as well, are more than happy to help. So if you want to get involved in reviewing, please just ask.
Thanks, Kim. And that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much to our panelists. We have a couple of more slides for our attendees. Can we go to the next slide? Inago Academy has a free and open blogging platform for researchers and scholarly writers. Feel free to write, publish, and grow by submitting to this platform. All you have to do is you have to go to the login bar and then fill in your details and then start submitting your articles. It could be plain language summaries. It could be layman summaries of your research work. It could be a news article that you wish to write. But basically, make use of this platform so that it reaches more than 1.2 million subscribers that we have at Inago Academy. Next slide, please. The benefits here on the slide are mentioned for your notice. Basically, you can increase your engagement on social media, promote your own profile. We have focused email campaigns for promoting your profile also. Grab the attention of industry experts. We have a lot of publishers and institutions that have subscribed to our newsletter. You can get insights on audience engagement. You can basically gauge what the readership interest is and get featured and gain visibility, expanding your global reach. it's very important to do this in this highly competitive era with a lot of researchers wanting space. So this is something that you can use in your free time. And of course, it's completely open. So yeah, this is one thing that we wanted to just share with the audience. We also have Inago Training Academy. So basically webinars such as this and workshops, also physical workshops, we do it for a lot of institutions. So if you have any requirements, feel free to scan here and let us know. At the same time, we're also looking for a lot of trainers and speakers who can preside over these workshops. So you can join our panel, become a recognized trainer. And this is also open to a lot of all the researchers, basically, early career and otherwise, so that you can add onto your profile and, build a very experienced digital profile. So do this, and thank you for attending, everyone. Happy learning to all of you. And again, thank you so much to the panel for being part of this session and this webinar. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a nice week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.